Japan has a wealth of creepy ghost stories, but this one is particularly chilling. The ghostly legend of Kuchisake-Onna, also known as the Slit-Mouthed Woman, crosses over into the realm of urban legend and may have some basis in fact. The original story of Kuchisake-Onna comes from the Edo period of Japan's history, which spanned through the 17th and 19th centuries. It's said that Kuchisake-Onna was either wife or concubine to a samurai, and she was extraordinarily vain. She grew lonely because the samurai was always away from home fighting, and began having affairs with men around the town. When the samurai heard of this, he was outraged. As punishment for her infidelity, her husband sliced the corners of her mouth from ear to ear. Once he was finished, he asked her, "Who will think you are beautiful now?" In other versions of the tale, her mouth was mutilated during a medical or dental procedure or by a woman who was jealous of her beauty. While the original tale is clearly a cautionary story to remain faithful, the story takes a creepy turn when the ghost of the Kuchisake-Onna began appearing in Japan in the 1970s. The story goes that a woman would appear to people travelling alone at night. The woman wore a surgical mask, not terribly uncommon in Japan, and would ask if the traveller thought she was pretty. If they said no, she would kill them immediately, or at least slash their faces the same as hers, usually with a long pair of surgical scissors. If the hapless victim said yes, she would then remove the mask and ask, "How about now?" revealing her bloody, gaping wounds. If the person said no at this second point, she would again mutilate and kill them, slashing open their mouth. If, however, the person said yes, they would still not be safe. She would follow them home and kill them on the threshold of their house. Said, the only way to survive an encounter with this ghoulish entity is to answer yes the first time, and so-so, or average, the second time, which caused the Kuchisake-Onna to pause and ponder the response, giving the victim a chance to escape. Without this distraction, the victim cannot escape the ghost, as she simply reappears before them if they try to run. As mentioned, the Kuchisake-Onna began making steady appearances in the 1970s, and in 1979 she was supposedly chasing children. Surprisingly enough, there is some basis for this. In 2007, a coroner found records that in the late 1970s there was indeed a woman who chased children. She was struck down by a car and killed whilst in the midst of such a chase, and she did have a torn mouth similar to the story. This woman was likely the cause of the panic in the late 1970s. The legend, however, has not died. It resurfaced in the early 2000s and is still prevalent today, though the means of escape is now telling the ghost you have a previous appointment to attend to, at which point she'll excuse her poor manners and depart. The legend has even spread to South Korea, where she appears with a blood-red face mask. The story has been used as a basis for a number of manga and novels, as well as a series of J-horror films. The Kuchisake-Onna is often mixed with the Yurei, depicted with similar long black hair which conceals her horrible smile. La Llorona, a mythical woman in Mexican and Latin American oral tradition whose siren-like wails are said to lure adults and children to their untimely deaths. The legend of La Llorona is a popular ghost story that is especially prominent on Dia de los Muertos and in Latin American communities. According to the legend, La Llorona was once a beautiful woman named Maria. In many variations of the tale, Maria's husband was an unfaithful or abusive man who treated their two sons more affectionately than he did his wife. Other retellings say that her husband may have left her for a wealthier or lighter-skinned woman. It's said that as Maria was walking with her sons by a river, she saw a familiar car passing by where a beautiful woman took position next to Maria's own husband. Out of jealousy, rage, or despair, she is said to have lured her own sons to the river and drowned them before drowning herself after realizing exactly what she had done. In another version, Maria's neglected sons drowned accidentally while she was cavorting with gentleman callers. Forever after, Maria's ghost, now La Llorona, is forced to wander the earth searching for her lost sons. She can be identified by her loud, wailing cries, mis hijos, ¿dónde están mis hijos?", which translates to my sons, where are my sons? Many versions of the story are told to children across Latin America, often to dissuade them from staying out too late at night. Some versions claim that La Llorona can be summoned in a seance-like environment. Others claim that she appears when children misbehave, or when men find themselves lost and alone near a lake or river. In some versions, she appears to mothers and steals their children, mistaking the children for her own lost sons. There are many stories of encounters with La Llorona. In 1968, American folklorist Bess Lomax Hawes published an article, La Llorona in Juvenile Hall, which gives accounts of a weeping woman haunting a juvenile detention facility in California. Some accounts describe La Llorona as having long hair and wearing a hooded cape or a veil. Others describe her as being young and pretty, being dressed entirely in black or white, or having the bones of her dead children embedded in her own backbone. In all iterations of the story, encountering La Llorona is to be avoided at all costs. It's said that those who hear La Llorona's cries are destined for misfortune, or even death. A desperate and malevolent spirit, she is said to act unflinchingly and without mercy, often drowning the children she has found or kidnapped when she realizes they are not her own sons. Some traditions hold that she will begin to seduce a lone man and then murder him as a form of revenge for her husband's abuse or adultery, while others assert that she kills men, women, and children indiscriminately. Eerily, her wails are often said to sound more distant the closer she is to her victims. If you're enjoying this episode so far, please do me a massive favour by clicking on the like button and subscribing to the channel. Now, on to the next story. The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall is a ghost that reportedly haunts Raynham Hall in Norfolk, England. It became one of the most famous hauntings in the United Kingdom when photographers from Country Life magazine claimed to have captured the ghost of the Brown Lady on camera. The Brown Lady is so named because of the brown brocade dress it is claimed that she wears. According to legend, the apparition is that of Dorothy Walpole, who lived from 1686 to 1726. Dorothy was the sister of Robert Walpole, generally regarded as the first Prime Minister of Great Britain. She was the second wife of Charles Townshend, 2nd Viscount Townshend, who was notorious for his violent temper. The story goes that when Townshend discovered that his wife had committed adultery with Lord Wharton, he punished her by locking her in a room in the family home, Raynham Hall. According to Mary Wortley Montague, Dorothy was in fact entrapped by the Countess of Wharton. She invited Dorothy over to stay for a few days, knowing that her husband would never allow her to leave, not even to see her children. She remained at Raynham Hall until her death in 1726 from smallpox. The first recorded claim of a sighting of the ghost was by Lucia C. Stone, concerning a gathering at Raynham Hall in the Christmas of 1835. Stone says that Charles Townshend had invited various guests to the hall, including a Colonel Loftus, to join in the Christmas festivities. Loftus and another guest named Hawkins said they had seen the brown lady one night as they approached their bedrooms, noting in particular the dated brown dress she wore. The following evening Loftus claimed to have seen the brown lady again, later reporting that on this occasion he was drawn to the spectre's empty eye sockets, dark in the glowing face. Loftus's sightings led to some staff permanently leaving Raynham Hall. The next reported sighting of the brown lady was made in 1836 by Captain Frederick Marryat, a friend of novelist Charles Dickens and the author of a series of popular sea novels. It's said that Marryat requested that he spend the night in the most haunted room of Raynham Hall to prove his theory that the haunting was caused by local smugglers anxious to keep people away from the area. Writing in 1891, Florence Marryat said of her father's experience, "He took possession of the room in which the portrait of the apparition hung, and in which she had often been seen, and slept each night with a loaded revolver under his pillow. For 2 days, however, he saw nothing, and the third was to be the limit of his stay. On that third night, however, 2 young men, nephews of the baronet, knocked at his door as he was undressing to go to bed, and asked him to step over to their room, which was at the other end of the corridor, and give them his opinion on a new gun just arrived from London. My father was in his shirt and trousers, but as the hour was late, and everybody had retired to rest except themselves, he prepared to accompany them as he was. As they were leaving the room, he caught up his revolver. 'In case you meet the brown lady,' he said, laughing. When the inspection of the gun was over, the young men in the same spirit declared they would accompany my father back again. 'In case you meet the brown lady,' they repeated, laughing also. The 3 gentlemen therefore returned in company. The corridor was long and dark, for the lights had been extinguished, but as they reached the middle of it, they saw the glimmer of a lamp coming towards them from the other end. 'One of the ladies going to visit the nurseries,' whispered the young Townsends to my father. Now the bedroom doors in that corridor faced each other, and each room had a double door with a space in between, as is the case in many old-fashioned houses. My father, as I've said, was in a shirt and trousers only, and his native modesty made him feel uncomfortable, so he slipped within one of the outer doors, his friends following his example, in order to conceal himself until the lady should have passed by. I've heard him describe how he watched her approaching nearer and nearer through the chink of the door, until, as she was close enough for him to distinguish the colours and style of her costume, he recognised the figure as the facsimile of the portrait of the brown lady. He had his finger on the trigger of his revolver, and was about to demand it to stop and give the reason for its presence there, when the figure halted of its own accord before the door behind which he stood, and holding the lighted lamp she carried to her features, grinned in a malicious and diabolical manner at him. This act so infuriated my father, who was anything but lamb-like in disposition, that he sprang into the corridor with a bound and discharged the revolver right in her face. The figure instantly disappeared, the figure at which for several minutes 3 men had been looking together, and the bullet passed through the outer door of the room onto the opposite side of the corridor and lodged in the panel of the inner one. My father never attempted again to interfere with the brown lady of Raynham Hall. Lady Townshend reported that the brown lady was next seen in 1926, when her son and his friend claimed to have seen the ghost on the staircase, identifying the ghostly figure with the portrait of Lady Dorothy Walpole, which was then hung in the haunted room. Ever since Marryat's encounter with the brown lady, sightings of her have dwindled, with some claiming that she now haunts nearby Houghton Hall and Sandringham House. If you were asked, do you believe in ghosts? Most people would probably answer saying they aren't sure. But the truth is that almost every culture in the world has some belief in ghosts. This has been evident through history, A recent Gallup poll indicated that more than half of all Americans do believe in ghosts. But of course, it's equally true to say that science can provide very little evidence to prove the existence of actual ghosts. With poltergeist activity, however, it's a very different story, with so many ordinary people witnessing the phenomena. Throughout the world and down through history, poltergeist activity occurs in much the same or very similar sequence of events. A haunting always starts with noises, usually tapping noises, quiet at first, but then building up to loud rapping and banging. The next thing to occur are usually small pools of water, spontaneously appearing on the floor and other surfaces around the house. The strange thing about these pools is that they're always neat and symmetrically shaped and never have splashes. After this, the activity can take various forms and increase in intensity and develop into a real haunting. One of the most remarkable cases on record was the well-documented case that the press called the Black Monk of Pontefract and happened in Yorkshire, England in 1966. It all began on an ordinary June morning at number 30 East Drive, Pontefract. That Thursday was warm and summery, and the Pritchard family were all home in the back garden of number 30 enjoying the sunshine. Joe Pritchard, his wife Jean, and their two children, Philip aged 15 and Diane aged 13, were sunbathing. But Gran, Mrs. Sarah Scholes, had gone indoors, out of the sun, and was sitting in the lounge, happily knitting a cardigan. It was the family in the garden who noticed the tapping noise first and in the beginning tried to ignore it. However, after a while, Joe sent young Philip inside to investigate. Philip, trying to follow the noise, wandered in through the kitchen and entered the lounge, where he met the strangest sight. Mrs. Scholes, his gran, was sitting knitting in a shower of grey-white powder, raining gently down on her. She had been so absorbed in her knitting that she hadn't noticed the powder shower until Philip walked in and made her look up. Once she saw it, she reacted as most grans would, with a 15-year-old grandson.
"Philip,"
she accused.
"what mischief have you been up to now?"
But even as she spoke, she realised her grandson could not possibly have been responsible because the top of the room was completely clear. The shower of powder began around 4 feet from the ground. When Mrs. Scholes went to the kitchen to get a dustpan and brush, she found the floor covered in pools of water and the tapping noises were getting louder. She called her daughter Jean, and together they mopped up the water, only to find it kept reappearing. They got Joe and Philip to pull up the liner, thinking the water was coming up through the floor, only to find the concrete floor was as dry as a bone. Joe returned to the back garden to turn off the water stopcock, noticing as he did so that his daughter, Diane, was taking absolutely no interest in the quite unusual proceedings going on all around her. For the rest of the day, pools of water kept mysteriously appearing in the kitchen, and the rapping noises grew louder and louder. Joe and Philip spent most of the night trying to track down the rapping noises, but they always seemed to come from the next room or somewhere else, completely untraceable. The next morning, Jean contacted the local water authority, who spent some time inspecting drains and checking for broken pipes, all to no avail. Eventually, they offered the rather lame excuse that it must be condensation, and left in rather a hurry. Over the next few weeks, things became almost unbearable for the Pritchard family. Apart from the noises which were now occurring mainly at night, objects started to move around the rooms. Ornaments, flower pots, eggs, and even cups of tea would disappear and be found later somewhere completely different. More disturbing still, strange things started appearing. At first, it was just small stones or pebbles raining down on the kitchen roof, which is a well-known and documented poltergeist phenomenon. However, one day, while Jean was cleaning out the kitchen grate, a multitude of old keys rattled down the chimney, some hitting her on the head. The collection included every key in the house, but also a number of very old keys that nobody had ever seen before. From then on, the haunting increased to include crockery and plant pots being broken, and an increase in the noise until a crack appeared in the bedroom ceiling. Electric lights switched themselves on and off at the wall and at the main switchboard, which was inside a locked cupboard. Then, one night, just as the vicar who had come to visit to offer spiritual comfort and guidance was leaving, their prized grandfather clock fell from the landing and smashed to pieces by the front door. The vicar promised to return, but never did. Much of this activity had been witnessed by policemen, newspapermen, the local member of parliament, and several priests, all of whom advised the Pritchards to leave the house immediately. But the Pritchards are of stubborn Yorkshire stock and steadfastly refused, vowing to stay and beat this thing. The local newspapers had the story and initially named the phenomena Mr. Nobody, but the Pritchard family, possibly in an effort to normalise the situation, gave the entity the name Fred. Although the haunting went on for a long time, it really came to a climax when the ghost began to show itself. At first, it was a tall, dark figure seen briefly at night or in a bad light, and Fred even seemed to have a sense of humour. One time when, at the vicar's suggestion, the family had an evening of singing hymns and religious songs in an effort to move Fred out, but Fred joined in by making a large pair of fluffy gloves appear to be conducting the singing. The next day, the gloves were still in the lounge, and Mrs. Scholes picked them up with the fire tongs, took them out into the back garden, doused them with paraffin, and burnt them. Then, one day the humour stopped, and everything changed while Jean was standing at the sink peeling potatoes. Suddenly, she recounted later, the hair on the back of my neck began to stand up, and I knew there was someone, or something, standing directly behind me. She turned around and found herself face to face with a very tall figure, dressed in a black monk's habit with a cowl covering his face. The figure looked quite solid, and oddly enough she felt no alarm or fear. Then, the monk simply vanished before her eyes, seemingly sinking into the floor. After this, the family saw the monk on numerous occasions, and the local press were prompted to look up old records in the library, and what they discovered was very interesting. It was revealed that way back in the reign of Henry VIII, the monk had been found guilty and later executed for the SA and murder of a young girl. So the conclusion was that the tormented spirit of the monk, now dubbed the Black Monk of Pontefract, was still wandering the earth on the site of his death. The last serious incident in the case occurred soon after and seemed to confirm everything that had been discovered about the Black Monk from the records. Late one evening, as Diane was going to bed, the lights went out all over the house, and Diane began to scream. When the family ran to her assistance with a torch, they saw an incredible sight. Diane was being dragged up the stairs by an invisible force. Her cardigan was being stretched out in front of her, as if being pulled by strong, yet unseen hands. She was also, it seemed, being held by the throat as her screams soon turned to choking gasps. Her father, mother, and brother grabbed hold of Diane and pulled, and after a considerable struggle, all four of them fell back down the stairs as the invisible force gave up. Diane had bright red marks, which would later turn to severe bruises on her throat in the strangle position. Once they had pulled themselves together and revived Diane with a large glass of brandy, the family decided enough was enough and moved out of the house to stay with relatives. After this, the hauntings which had occurred over 9 months faded away quite quickly and disappeared altogether. We could conjecture that with young Diane, who had obviously been the focus in this case, away from the house the Black Monk no longer had an earthly energy source to operate from. Eventually the Pritchard family went home, repaired the crack in the bedroom ceiling, cut the grass, trimmed the neglected hedges, and generally got on with their lives, like the good Yorkshire people they were. Today, 30 East Drive is the focus of many paranormal investigations where multiple incidents have been recorded on camera. The following footage was recorded within the walls of 30 East Drive by Alison from Haunted Horizons. I first came across this footage on Beardo's Weirdos YouTube channel, so I thought I'd take a look at the video myself, and I was quite surprised by what I saw. Alison has kindly given me permission to use this clip, so I'd like to say thank you to Alison, and I'll link her channel in the video description down below. Now, I'm not saying for 1 minute that this was definitely the work of the Black Monk of Pontefract, or any other ghosts who may or may not inhabit 30 East Drive. But to me, this doll definitely looks to have been pushed by an unseen force. Have a look for yourself and let me know what you think in the comments section.
The only way I'm going to know you're here is if you make a sound. Or you light one of these lights up. Can you do that for me? That's just natural building sound, I think. There's a bit of a tap up there. That's me creaking as well, by the way, if you're wondering what that noise is. If you're going to make a sound, it's got to be a loud one. There's a doll at the top of the stairs there. She should be in the bedroom. Oh my God. Oh my God. She should be in the bedroom. Oh my God. Oh my God. God.
Well, that's all for today. I really hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, then please do me a huge favour by clicking on the like button and subscribing to the channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. Please also leave any thoughts on today's stories in the comments section. I always try my very best to respond to any comments. As always, thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.